She's a gold digger. Plain and simple. Evelyn Montgomery's voice sliced through the cavernous dining room of the Montgomery estate like a blade, her water glass trembling against the polished mahogany as she extended a manicured finger across the table toward Chloe Winters Montgomery. The crystal chandelier overhead cast dancing shadows across the faces of everyone seated there, but nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Mother, that's enough. Julian Montgomery's jaw was wired shut with tension, his words barely escaping through clenched teeth as he gripped the edge of the table. But his wife, Chloe, remained unnervingly composed across from him, methodically cutting into her roasted chicken, as if the accusation hanging in the air was nothing more than background noise. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just kept cutting. Enough? Evelyn let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed off the walls lined with generations of Montgomery portraits. Julian, open your eyes. This woman married you for your bank account, plain and simple, and now she's perched at our family table like she actually belongs here. Like we're supposed to pretend she's one of us. Around the table, the rest of the Montgomery clan nodded in silent, unified agreement. Julian's brother, Philip, adjusted his cufflinks and cleared his throat pointedly, the sound carrying more weight than any words could have. His eyes met Julian's across the table, then slid away. Jules, you have to admit the timing raises questions. Philip's voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of someone who believed he was being helpful. 6 months of dating. Then a rushed wedding with barely any notice. And now she's suddenly curious about the family portfolio, asking questions she shouldn't even know to ask. I wasn't asking about the portfolio, Chloe said evenly, her eyes still fixed on her plate, her voice carrying no defensiveness, no anger. Just fact. I was asking about the community foundation, the work it does, the families it serves. Same difference, snapped Julian's sister, Alexandra, leaning forward with her elbows on the table, her diamond bracelet catching the light. That foundation manages over $50 million in assets. And out of nowhere, you're desperate to get involved. How convenient for you. How perfectly timed. Julian's father, Harrison Montgomery, had remained silent through most of the assault, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he studied his daughter-in-law with the same careful attention he gave to business negotiations. Now he leaned forward, and the room seemed to contract around him, his voice carrying the weight of decades of accumulated privilege and power. Son, we've been patient. Longer than most families would have been. But this woman comes from nowhere. No family money. No social connections. No background we can verify despite our best efforts. She comes from Atlanta, Julian said firmly, his voice rising despite his best efforts to stay calm. She worked her way through Spelman College. She has a master's degree from Emory. That's not nowhere. In what? Evelyn interrupted, her tone dripping with venom so thick it seemed to coat the air between them. Public health. Chloe finally looked up, and for a moment her gaze met Evelyn's directly. No flinching. No backing down. Just a quiet steadiness that seemed to unnerve her mother-in-law more than any outburst would have. Please. Evelyn's smile was fake as plastic flowers, her eyes narrowing. That's not exactly a lucrative field, is it, dear? I mean, public health workers barely make enough to afford rent in most cities. How do you expect us to believe? Chloe set down her fork with deliberate care. No, Mrs. Montgomery. Public health doesn't pay much. You're absolutely right about that. The fork clicked against the plate, and the sound seemed louder than it should have been. See? Philip jumped in immediately, seizing on her words like a lifeline. She admits it. Julian, you're worth over $300 million. Do the math. It's not complicated. 6 months of dating, a whirlwind wedding, and now she's asking about money. Connect the dots. Alexandra leaned forward further, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who believed they'd finally caught their prey. What I really want to know is why she won't sign a postnuptial agreement. That's the question nobody's asking. If she's not after the money, if her intentions are so pure, then what's the problem? Why the resistance? Because it's degrading, Julian shot back, his voice cracking with frustration. I love my wife, and I trust her. I shouldn't have to ask her to prove anything. She's proven herself to me every single day since we met. Your belief doesn't safeguard our family's future, Harrison said coldly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Your faith doesn't protect what 3 generations of this family built. This woman could walk away tomorrow and take half of everything. Half of your grandfather's legacy. Half of your children's inheritance. Half of everything we've bled for. Chloe placed her knife and fork neatly on her plate and looked around the table at each of them in turn. The silence stretched, and Julian could feel his heart pounding in his chest, could see his mother's triumphant expression, his father's cold satisfaction, his siblings' certainty that they'd finally won. May I say something? Chloe's voice was quiet but steady, carrying none of the tremor that Julian would have expected. None of the hurt that had to be there beneath the surface. Oh, this should be entertaining, Evelyn muttered, settling back in her chair with the air of someone about to watch a performance. Chloe stood slowly, pushing her chair back with deliberate grace, and Julian noticed something flicker in her eyes that he'd never witnessed before in 6 months of marriage. Not pain, not anger, not even the defensive fire he'd seen flash briefly when his mother's comments cut too deep. Something closer to compassion. Something that looked almost like pity. I've been sitting at this table for 6 months, Chloe said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without ever rising. Listening to all of you dissect my intentions like I'm invisible. Like I'm not a person sitting right here. Like I'm something you need to protect Julian from. Well, what are your intentions? Alexandra demanded, but there was something uncertain in her voice now, something that hadn't been there before. My intentions? Chloe smiled, but there was no warmth in it, no accommodation. It was the smile of someone who'd finally stopped trying to please people who would never be pleased. My intentions were to marry the man I love. That's it. That's all it was. And maybe, eventually, to be embraced by his family. To be welcomed instead of investigated. To be loved instead of suspected. Philip snorted, the sound harsh and dismissive.
Right.
And his $300 million had absolutely nothing to do with it. You just happened to fall in love with one of the wealthiest men in Atlanta. What are the odds? You know what's funny about that number? Chloe asked, reaching into the pocket of her simple black dress for her phone. She pulled it out casually, as if checking the time. 300 million? Evelyn's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What's funny about it? It's less than I spent on brunch last Saturday. The room went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on everyone present. Even the servants seemed to freeze in the doorway. Julian stared at his wife, his mind refusing to process her words. What? Chloe was typing on her phone with practiced ease, her thumbs moving across the screen. I had a business brunch last weekend at the Four Seasons. Acquired a logistics company based out of Savannah. Cost me about $420 million.
Give or take.
That's impossible. Harrison sputtered, for once in his life, seeming at a loss for words. You're a public health worker. You counsel families at community health centers. You
was.
Chloe corrected gently, holding up her phone so they could all see the screen. I was a public health worker for about 8 months after graduate school, while I was quietly building my actual business, while I was figuring out my next chapter. She held the phone higher. Would you like to see the wire transfer? It's right here in my banking app. $627 million, to be precise. The logistics company was a bargain. Philip was shaking his head, his face pale beneath his tan. This is absurd. You can't just claim. Summit Industries, Chloe said simply. The name landed in the room like a grenade. The color drained from Harrison's face completely, leaving him looking gray and suddenly old. What did you say? Summit Industries. Chloe's voice was calm, patient, as if she were explaining something to a child. You know the company. Everyone in this room knows the company. We hold about 40% of the sustainable manufacturing patents in North America. We just secured that $75 billion federal contract for eco-friendly infrastructure. The one that's been in all the news. The one that's going to transform how half the country's industries operate. Evelyn's water glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, sending water and crystal fragments in every direction. That's impossible, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You can't be. Chloe sat back down and picked up her fork, returning to her dinner as if nothing had happened. My full name is Chloe Winters Montgomery, as in C. Winters, founder and CEO of Summit Industries. It's nice to finally introduce myself properly. Julian was staring at his wife like she'd just stepped off a spaceship, like the woman he'd shared a bed with for 6 months was suddenly a stranger. Chloe, what are you talking about? How is this possible? Sweetheart, remember when we met? Chloe's voice softened when she looked at him, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her all evening. I told you I was taking time off to figure out my next chapter, to decide what I wanted to do with my life. Yes, but I thought you meant I sold my first company for $2.3 billion when I was 24. $2.3 billion. I was exhausted, Julian. Burnout in ways I can't describe. I'd spent 6 years building something from nothing, and when I sold it, I crashed. I needed to remember who I was outside of boardrooms and balance sheets. The silence in the room was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. So I took a position in public health because I wanted to do meaningful work while I sorted out my future. I wanted to help real people with real problems. I wanted to remember why I'd started building companies in the first place. Chloe's eyes found Julian's across the table. That's where I met you, at the Community Health Center in Vine City. You were volunteering with the pediatric program. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care. You just saw a woman who cared about the same things you cared about. Alexandra found her voice first, though it came out strangled. You're saying you're wealthy? You're rich? I'm saying I'm worth approximately $117 billion as of this morning's market numbers. Chloe picked up her water glass and took a calm sip. 117 billion, 342 million, to be precise. Though that changes throughout the day depending on how trading goes. Philip looked like he needed to sit down, though he was already sitting. His face had gone from pale to ashen. 117 billion? That's more than your entire family's net worth several times over, yes. Chloe nodded pleasantly. I'm aware. Evelyn was shaking her head frantically, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins. This can't be real. This is some kind of trick. You're lying. Show us proof. Show us real proof. Chloe sighed, the first sign of genuine weariness she'd shown all evening. She pulled up her banking app again and handed the phone to Julian first. Honey, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted you to love me for me, not for my money. Not for what I could do for you. Just for me. Julian stared at the screen, at account balances with more zeros than he'd ever imagined existed in the world. Numbers that made his own considerable wealth look like pocket change. He scrolled, and the numbers kept going. Investments. Holdings. Liquid assets. Everything verified. Everything real. Chloe, how is this possible? You're 29 years old. I started my first company when I was 18. Chloe settled back in her chair, and for the first time all evening, she looked completely at home. Built it in my dorm room at Spelman. My roommate thought I was crazy. Stayed up all night coding, went to class on no sleep, pitched investors between exams. Sold it when I was 24 for $800 million. Used that capital to launch Summit Industries. She looked around the table at the stunned faces of Julian's family. I've been developing sustainable manufacturing technology for the last 6 years. Green materials, circular economy systems, clean production methods that didn't exist before we invented them. That federal contract we just secured is going to change everything. Harrison was staring at her like she descended from another planet, like the laws of physics had just been rewritten in front of him. But you're so young. And you're black. Chloe finished for him, her voice carrying no heat, just quiet acknowledgement. Yes, Mr. Montgomery. Black women can be billionaires too. I know it's shocking. It shocks a lot of people. But here we are. That's not what I meant, Harrison started, but even he seemed to hear how hollow the words sounded. Yes, it is, Chloe said quietly, firmly. That's exactly what you meant. You saw a young black woman at your son's side, and you didn't see an heiress. You didn't see a founder. You didn't see someone who might actually be his equal. You saw someone who must be after something. You saw a threat to be neutralized. Julian was still processing, still staring at the phone in his hands. Chloe, why didn't you tell me? All those nights we lay in bed talking about our futures, our dreams. Why didn't you just? Because, sweetheart, I've been in relationships before where men only wanted me for my wealth. Chloe's voice was gentle now, reaching for him across the distance the revelation had created. When I met you, you had no idea who I was. You just saw a woman at a health center wearing old jeans and a tired smile, and you fell in love with her. With me. Not with my net worth. Not with my companies. With me. I wanted to keep that. I wanted to protect that. But I should have.
No,
You shouldn't have. I wanted you to love Chloe, the person. Not C. Winters, the billionaire. She looked back at the family, at his mother's tears, his father's shock, his siblings' disbelief. And I wanted your family to accept me for who I am, not for what I'm worth. I wanted to earn my place here the old-fashioned way, by being a good wife, by being a good person, by showing up and trying. Evelyn was crying now, real tears cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup. Chloe, we had no idea. We never would have.
no, you didn't.
But that's not the point. Chloe stood again and walked to the window overlooking the manicured gardens, the fountains, the rolling acres of Montgomery land. The point is that you saw a black woman and immediately decided she must be a gold digger. You didn't investigate. You didn't ask questions. You didn't give me a chance. You just assumed. We were protecting our son. Philip started, but his voice lacked conviction. From what? From someone who loves him? From someone who's actually worth more than your entire family combined? Chloe turned to face them, and in the soft light from the garden, she looked regal. From someone who could buy and sell everything you own without blinking? What exactly were you protecting him from? Alexandra was shaking her head in disbelief, her earlier confidence completely gone. Chloe, we owe you such an enormous apology. We were so wrong about everything.
Do you?
Chloe tilted her head, studying them. Do you really owe me an apology? Or are you just sorry because you found out I'm rich? Because here's the thing, if I were still just a public health worker making $50,000 a year, would any of you be sitting here right now talking about how wrong you were? Would you be crying? Would you be apologizing? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and nobody in the room could meet her eyes. Because here's the thing, Chloe continued, her voice never rising, never losing its calm. I've been sitting at this table for 6 months. 6 months of Sunday dinners. 6 months of holiday gatherings. 6 months of listening to you question my motives, investigate my background, and treat me like I'm some kind of con artist who snuck in through a window. We didn't mean... Evelyn started, reaching out with a trembling hand. Yes, you did. You meant every word of it. Every question. Every suspicion. Every whispered conversation you thought I couldn't hear. And you know what the really sad part is? Chloe pulled out her phone again and showed them another screen, another app. Yesterday morning, before that business brunch where I acquired the logistics company, I had another meeting. What kind of meeting? Julian asked quietly, his voice rough. With my attorneys. I was establishing a foundation. She showed them the screen, the legal documents, the incorporation papers. The Montgomery Family Foundation. I was planning to donate $600 million to create a charitable trust in your family's name. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. $600 million? I wanted to surprise Julian for our first anniversary. Chloe's voice softened slightly. I thought it would be a meaningful way to honor his family's commitment to community work. I researched your foundation. I looked at the good you've done over the years. I thought maybe this would show you that I was serious, that I wanted to be part of this family in a real way. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing, could hear the soft tick of the antique clock in the corner. But after tonight, Chloe continued, I think I'll name it something else. The Winters Foundation, maybe. Or the Community First Trust. Something that doesn't carry your name. Julian looked devastated, his eyes glistening. "Chloe, please. Don't do this. Don't let them. Don't let us. Julian, I love you. I will always love you. Nothing that happened tonight changes that." Chloe crossed to him and took his hand, and the gesture was so natural, so loving, that it made the tension in the room even more painful. "But your family has spent 6 months showing me exactly what they think of people like me. People who don't come from money. People who don't have the right background. People whose skin is the wrong color." She looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Even now, I can see all of you recalculating. Trying to figure out how to treat me now that you know I'm worth more than all of you combined. Trying to figure out how to pivot, how to save face, how to get back in my good graces." Harrison cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was different, humbled in a way Julian had never heard from his father. "Chloe, you're right. We judged you unfairly. There's no excuse for it. You judged me based on my race," Chloe said bluntly. "Let's be honest about what this really was. Let's not dress it up in polite language. You looked at me and you saw a black woman who didn't belong. Full stop." "You're right," Philip said quietly, and there were tears in his eyes too now.
We did.
"And we were wrong. Horribly wrong." "Yes, you were. But the damage is done." Chloe walked back to the table and stood behind her chair, her hand resting on the polished wood. "Julian, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. Anything." He would have said anything to her in that moment. "Did you know about my money? Before tonight? Did you suspect? Did you investigate?" Julian shook his head vehemently. "I swear I had no idea. You said you worked in public health. You drove that old Honda Civic with the dented bumper. You lived in that tiny apartment in Inglewood with the shared laundry room. You talked about your student loans like they were still a burden. How could I have known? I still drive that car because I like it." Chloe smiled slightly. "It's reliable. It's paid for. It doesn't draw attention. I still live in that apartment because it's home. It's where I figured out who I was after I sold my first company. It's where I started to heal. Money doesn't change who you are as a person, Julian." She looked at his family, at their stunned, tear-streaked faces. "But apparently knowing about money changes how other people see you. Apparently it changes everything." Evelyn was sobbing openly now, her carefully constructed composure completely collapsed. "Chloe, please forgive us. We were so wrong.
So blind.
So cruel. Mrs. Montgomery, I don't know if I can. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You spent 6 months treating me like I was trying to steal from your family. You questioned everything I did, everything I said, everything I wore. You made me feel like I had to prove myself every single day, and nothing I did was ever enough. We were scared," Alexandra cried, her voice breaking. "That's not an excuse, but it's the truth. We were scared of losing Julian. Scared of losing what we've built." "Of what?" Chloe's voice was gentle now, almost compassionate. "Of a black woman joining your family? Of someone who didn't come from old money? Of change? Because that's what this was really about.
Change.
Something different. Someone who didn't fit your template." Chloe picked up her purse from the back of her chair. "I'm going to ask Julian to take me home now. And tomorrow, we're going to have a very serious conversation about what this means for our marriage. About whether we can move forward from this. About what kind of future we want to build together."
"Chloe, wait."
Harrison stood up, and for the first time in his life, he looked uncertain. "Please don't leave like this.
Give us a chance to make this right."
"Mr. Montgomery, for 6 months, I've been trying to prove I'm worthy of this family, of your son, of your name. Tonight, I realized something important."
"What?"
"I don't need to prove anything to anyone." Chloe's voice was steady, sure. "I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. Not just in dollars, but as a human being. And I know I deserve better than this. Better than suspicion. Better than constant judgment. Better than being treated like a criminal in my own home." She looked at Julian, and her eyes softened. "Honey, are you ready to go?" Julian stood up, his face showing the weight of everything he'd just learned. Everything he'd just lost and gained in the span of an hour. "Chloe, can we talk about this? All of it?"
"Please. Of course we can."
"That's what marriage is. That's what love is. But not here. Not with an audience that spent months treating your wife like she was less than. Not in a room full of people who are only now realizing they were wrong because the numbers didn't add up the way they expected. As they reached the door, Evelyn called out one more time, her voice desperate.
Chloe, please. How can we make this right? Tell us how.
We'll do anything. Chloe stopped and turned around. Her hand was on the door handle, and behind her, Julian stood waiting, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Montgomery, I don't know if you can. I really don't. Some things can't be unsaid. Some suspicions can't be unthought. But if you really want to try, here's a suggestion. Anything. Evelyn was clutching the edge of the table for support. Take a long, hard look at why you saw a young black woman and immediately assumed the worst about her. Examine that. Sit with it. And then ask yourself what that says about who you really are. Not who you want to be. Not who you pretend to be at charity galas. Who you actually are deep down when no one's watching. She opened the door. And then ask yourself if that's who you want to stay. The door closed behind them, and the Montgomery family was left alone with the shattered glass, the cold dinner, and the weight of everything they'd just lost. 3 months later, Julian and Chloe were sitting in their favorite coffee shop in Limerick Park, the same place where Julian had first asked her out after they'd spent a day organizing health screenings at the community center. The same corner table, the same mismatched chairs, the same smell of fresh coffee and baked goods. So, Julian said, stirring his latte nervously, watching the foam swirl. The family wants to know if you'll consider coming to Sunday dinner again. They've been asking for weeks. Mom calls every day. Chloe looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing plans for her new foundation, the one that would eventually bear the Winters name and serve thousands of families across Atlanta. What did you tell them? I told them it's up to you. That I wouldn't pressure you. That they had to earn it. But Chloe, they've changed. Really changed. How so? Julian pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. My mother started volunteering at 3 different organizations that work with underserved communities in South Atlanta. Not writing checks from a distance. Actually showing up. She's been there every week for 2 months. She serves meals. She reads to kids. She cleans bathrooms. Chloe raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Interesting. That doesn't sound like the Evelyn Montgomery I know. It gets better. Philip. He's taking courses on unconscious bias and diversity in business leadership. He's actually doing the work, reading the books, having the uncomfortable conversations. He called me last week to talk about what he's learning, and he was crying, Chloe.
Crying.
I've never seen my brother cry. Chloe set down her tablet, giving him her full attention. And Alexandra? Alexandra started a scholarship program for Black students interested in environmental science and sustainability. She's funding it herself. $50,000 a year for 10 students. She's been meeting with local high schools, talking to students, encouraging them to apply. And your father? Julian smiled, and there was something like wonder in his expression. Dad's been the most surprising of all. He asked me to set up a meeting with some of your business partners. Said, he wants to learn about sustainable investing. Actually learn. Not just make a show of it. He's been reading everything he can get his hands on. Called me last night to ask if I thought you'd be willing to explain the battery storage technology to him, because he doesn't understand it from the articles. Chloe closed her tablet and really looked at her husband, studied his face for any sign of manipulation, any hint that this was just another angle. Julian, are they doing this because they're genuinely sorry? Or because they found out I'm rich and they're trying to get back in my good graces? Julian thought about it for a long moment, and she could see him weighing his words carefully. Honestly, I think it started because they were embarrassed. Because they realized how wrong they were and how badly they'd messed up. But I think it's becoming something real. Something deeper. What do you mean? I mean, my mother called me crying last week. Not the dramatic crying from that night. Real crying. Ugly crying. She said she realized that the way they treated you was the same way her grandmother's family was treated when they came here from Mexico.
Poor.
Desperate. Unwelcome. She said her grandmother used to tell her stories about being treated like she didn't belong, like she was less than, like she was trying to steal something that wasn't hers. Chloe was quiet, listening. And she said she never wanted to make another person feel the way her grandmother felt. But she did.
She made you feel that way.
And she can't take it back. She can only try to be different, to do better. They sat quietly for a moment, watching the Los Angeles sunlight filter through the coffee shop windows, watching people walk by on the sidewalk outside. Regular people with regular lives, unaware of the conversation happening behind the glass. Julian, can I ask you something? Of course. Anything. Are you angry that I didn't tell you about the money? Truly angry, I mean. Not just surprised. Not just shocked.
Angry.
Julian thought about it, really thought about it in a way she could see on his face. I was at first.
For about a day.
I felt like I didn't know you. Like maybe our whole relationship was built on something false.
And now?
And now I realized something. Something important.
What?
I fell in love with you because of who you are. Not what you have. Who you are. Your kindness. Your intelligence. Your ridiculous laugh when you watch old comedies. Your passion for helping people who have nothing. The way you talk to strangers like they matter. The way you remember everyone's name at the health center. The way you hold my hand when you think I'm asleep. Chloe's eyes glistened. The money doesn't change any of that. It never did. It never could. But it changes how people see me. It changes how some people see you. And I hate that. I hate that people will look at us differently now. Julian, I don't care if you're worth $100 billion or $100. I love you either way. The money is it's just numbers in a bank account. It's not who I am. Chloe smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in weeks. Even if I'm richer than your whole family put together? Especially because you're richer than my whole family put together. Julian grinned. Do you have any idea how incredible it is to be married to someone who's actually changing the world? Someone who's not just writing checks but building the future? My wife is going to help power half the country with clean energy. My wife. That's amazing. Julian Montgomery. You are such a complete and total nerd. Yeah, but I'm your nerd. His grin widened. And I'm not going anywhere. Chloe laughed and reached across the table to take his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Okay, one Sunday dinner. But if anyone says anything about me buying my way into the family, or asks me to invest in their cousin's startup, or treat me like I'm suddenly a different person because they know my net worth, I'm leaving. No discussion. No second chances.
Deal.
Julian squeezed her hand. And I'll be right there with you. We leave together or we stay together. However it goes.
And Julian? Yeah.
For what it's worth, I think your family learned something important from all this. Something they couldn't have learned any other way. What's that? That the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can put a price tag on. That money doesn't make you better than anyone else. That the way you treat people matters more than the balance in your bank account. Maybe they needed to learn that. Maybe we all did. 6 months later, Chloe was back at the Montgomery family table. But this time, everything was different. Instead of suspicious questions about her motives, she was fielding genuine requests for advice about the family's philanthropic giving. Evelyn wanted to know which organizations did the most good with every dollar. Philip asked her opinion on impact investing. Alexandra wanted her help designing the curriculum for her scholarship program. Instead of whispered conversations about her background, she was having animated discussions about sustainable infrastructure with Harrison. He'd read all the articles, done the research, and actually had thoughtful questions about the technology and its implementation. He wanted to understand, not just to be polite. Instead of feeling like an outsider, like someone who had to constantly prove herself, Chloe felt like what she'd always wanted to be. Part of the family. Not because of her money, not because of what she could do for them, but because they'd finally done the work. They'd examined themselves. They'd changed. The dinner was warm, lively, full of laughter and genuine conversation. Evelyn hugged her when she arrived. Harrison asked her opinion on a business matter and actually listened to her answer. Philip and Alexandra treated her like a sister, teasing her gently, including her in family jokes. But the best part wasn't the change in Julian's family. The best part was what Chloe had learned about herself through all of it. Her worth had never been about the money in her bank account. Not when she was a broke college student building her first company in her dorm room. Not when she sold that company for billions. Not when she started Summit Industries. Not when she met Julian. Not when his family judged her. Not even now, sitting at their table, finally accepted. Her worth was about her character, her values, her refusal to accept anything less than the respect she deserved from anyone, no matter what they offered her. Her willingness to love anyway, even when it was hard. Her determination to keep being herself, no matter what anyone thought of her. That was worth more than all the billions in the world. And as she looked around the table at her husband, at his family, at the future they were all building together, Chloe knew that she'd finally found what she'd been looking for all along. Not acceptance,
But peace.
and that was everything.